He has to go immediately. Immediately. He is a murderer. He's a crime, minister, a crime. We're all very, very frustrated that he's still there.
Bibi and his allies are the most illegitimate of leaders to head the response to Hamas because their leadership is responsible for Hamas, the IDF's failed response to the attack, and the intelligence failures that made the attack possible. Israel knows this. Their hand in Israeli politics over the decades, all the way to the circumstance of its earliest years, is poison. What Bibi and his allies are and what they would bring has been obvious since 1995. It's been obvious where they would take Israel and Palestinians. You can see this in what they were willing to say of Rabin and Oslo. The assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was the culmination of an anti-violence rally in support of the Oslo peace process. Rabin was disparaged personally by right-wing conservatives and Likud leaders who perceived the peace process as an attempt to forfeit the occupied territories and a capitulation to Israel's enemies. National religious conservatives and Likud party leaders believed that withdrawing from any Jewish land was heresy. The Likud leader and future Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused Rabin's government of being, quote, removed from Jewish tradition and Jewish values, unquote. Right-wing rabbis associated with the settlers movement prohibited territorial concessions to the Palestinians and forbade soldiers in the Israeli Defense Forces from evacuating Jewish settlers under the Accords. Some rabbis proclaimed din rodef based on a traditional Jewish law of self-defense against Rabin personally, arguing that the Oslo Accords would endanger Jewish lives. Rallies organized by Likud and other right-wing groups featured depictions of Rabin in a Nazi SS uniform or in the crosshairs of a gun. Protesters compared the Labor Party to the Nazis and Rabin to Adolf Hitler and chanted, "Rabin is a murderer" and "Rabin is a traitor." In July 1995, Netanyahu led a mock funeral procession featuring a coffin and a hangman's noose at an anti-Rabin rally where protesters chanted "Death to Rabin." The chief of internal security, Carmi Gilon, then alerted Netanyahu of a plot on Rabin's life and asked him to moderate the protests' rhetoric, which Netanyahu declined to do. Netanyahu denied any intention to incite violence. Yeah, where have we heard any of this before? And they are still screaming the same things about those that get in their way.
And what about those Palestinians in hospital who are on life support and babies and incubators whose life support and incubator will have to be turned off because the Israelis have cut the power to Gaza?
Are you seriously keep on asking me about Palestinian civilians? What's wrong with you? Have you not seen what happened? We're fighting Nazis.
I've been showing pictures this morning that would illustrate that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Are you a mother?
Yes.
What would you think if your children would have been executed in front of your eyes? Would you expect your government to think about those Nazis committing those crimes and to say, wait a second, first of all, we need to protect the enemy?
We know that we must, first of all, to destroy the Hamas, the Gaza, okay, the Gaza. We must destroy Gaza.
Some factions within Israel have been screaming the same thing about people that get in the way of what they want for a very, very long time. They've been using the same words against people they don't like for at least 20 years.
When Balfour wrote of his government's intent to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine, 90% of the people living there were not Jewish. Just 31 years later, most of them were gone.
כמה אתה חושב אנשים הרגת ככה?
לא ספרתי. אני לא יכול לדעת בחיי. היה לי מקלע עם 250 כדורים.
Something without sin can cast the first stone.
One of the events that helped speed up these changes took place on April 9th, 1948, when the village of Dir Yassin was attacked. A British government report to the United Nations describes the scene. 250 people were killed in circumstances of great savagery. Women and children were stripped, lined up, photographed, and then slaughtered by automatic firing. The story of what happened at Dir Yassin set off panic all over the country. As news spread, people fled, fearing they would be next. Historians have recorded dozens of similar massacres during this period. Each time, they would result in entire communities fleeing.
תמיד הייתה הוראה, והייתה הוראה של בן גוריון, לגרש את האנשים משם. כבשנו את המקום, טרקטורים חרשו את המקום. חרשו. לא נשאר זכר של כפר. למה? לא רצו שתהיה, לא חזרה ולא זכר של המקום.
The larger Israeli population rages at them for all this. But that rage is matched by Bibi's faction. It is aimed at Gazans and Palestinians because of Hamas's success. This is the faction directing the response to Hamas, and the orders all are subject to at their direction. And at what point does the hope pinned on a refuge or a homeland die in the face of all this, when the path taken destroys it?
I was very frustrated and unhappy with the previous government. I felt that it was kind of like a religious settler government. And I think this war, this conflict is like the biggest proof of their incompetence. And I'm very happy that there is a unity government, but I don't see a future for Israel in general. I feel that the society is collapsing and that's it.
All this anguish is in the face of the homes and places people were born in or migrated to. This toxic river is run right through it. Did it ever have to take this path? Bibi and his faction must be repudiated. This is the very first step to grapple with Hamas's attack and the very latest iterations of bloodshed and terror spanning 75 years. This faction is past the limit of tolerance. Bibi is the last person that should head Israel's response to Hamas's assault. All of Israel knows this, even in the midst of a unity government that assaults the symptoms rather than the root cause. The only thing their desire has brought is death and misery, for the simple reason that before them, Jews lived in Palestine were not targets as they are now. Ethnic cleansing and terror are immoral. A nation founded by it pays a terrible, brutal price. Everyone is a minority one way or another. Safety in uniformity is a delusion. The latest threat to it can only be achieved by embracing this reality and going on from there. There is only one path Israel is on right now, and it consists of decades more of atrocity, where the next rebellion forged and the crime against humanity undertaken today rises in the midst of apartheid to attack an Israeli town, and Israel responds by annihilating 10 times as many children. And I don't think anyone would want to imagine that this was ordained by God.
And we have to understand what is the root cause behind all of this. Otherwise, we would never reach a true solution. It is not the difference of religions. which is causing this conflict. We had differences between Judaism and Islam for 1400 years, and still we lived in peace. Palestine is a beautiful example.
Yes.
Until approximately 100 years ago, Jewish people, a very small minority, lived amongst the vast majority of Muslims in a beautiful peace. Jews were protected, they were respected. And when and why was all of this destroyed? This was by the invention of Zionism. When this philosophy of Zionism first came into the land with the agenda of oppressing, taking rule over the indigenous population. We have to understand that the state of Israel does not represent all Jews, and certainly does not represent the Jewish religion. According to Jewish religion, all of this is criminal. All of this is forbidden. Basics of Jewish belief teaches that Jews are in a divinely decreed exile. We are even forbidden to create a sovereignty for ourselves. But especially when this is by killing, stealing, oppressing an entire people. This is not only criminal according to international law. This is a true violation of Judaism.